to SA Judo Academy. I'm sitting here with the marvellous Steve Brown, Judo Olympian and MMA fighter. Very, very pleased to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming in.
No, you're welcome. So just want to ask you a little bit about your past in Judo and in MMA. Steve's fighting Ryan Cooper on the 24th of February in DFC 8, that's Diamondback Fighting, at the Adelaide Oval. So that's set to be a really great event. If you haven't been, they put on a really great show at the DFC. So tell us a little bit about your fight history. What got you started in Judo?
So I started in Judo, I was 6 years old, and it was, I think, a combination of everyone at my school did it. We had a club at the school and there was, so many kids in that club, so it wasn't uncommon. It was almost like playing football. But then aside from that, I think part of it was an instinctual thing for me. I was a typical young boy, rough, wanted to be a Ninja Turtle, that sort of thing. So the opportunity, the fact that the judo club was there, had any club been there, I probably would have been. I just wanted to be a Ninja Turtle. So,
like a Ninja Turtle, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. So when did you start realising that you had potential? Because obviously you've represented Australia at the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games. So was it around 14 or so that you start looking to that high level of competition?
Yeah, I think I was a slow starter. I often tell kids here, and some of them don't believe me, I didn't win a medal for my first 3 years of judo. So I was a bit of a slow starter there. I mean, I won fights, but couldn't sometimes string it together. But I'm talking as a 7 and 8 year old. When I was about 11, I remember I saw a guy come to training and he had state stripes on his shoulders, and I never knew what they were. And I asked him, and he said, "Oh, when you go in a state team, you get them." And I was like, "Right, I want them." So I made my first state team at 13, which is the youngest that we used to have state teams for. And then from there, I guess your eyes get opened up. All of a sudden, you're in weigh-in rooms and you're in with people who have been to the highest levels, and that's, I guess, opens up that there's a bigger world out there than your little club.
Oh, fantastic. So not many of us mere mortals have the opportunity to compete on a world stage. So what's it like competing at the ultimate at the Olympics?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I actually remember even prior to probably knowing where I wanted to go in judo, or even having those thoughts, I remember the 96 Olympics, I must have been 10, and I remember going, I'm going to go to the Olympics one day. And I probably didn't even know what I was going to go in, I just wanted to go. And at the time, it's probably surreal. I made a point of making sure that I took everything in, because everyone keeps telling you that this will go by quicker than you can blink, and it does. But the opportunity to compete on those stages, and Olympics is obviously the biggest of the stages, but any of those really big tournaments in front of big crowds, and that's what you play sport for. It's that rush you get, that rush when you walk out and all you can see is people, and yeah, it's like being at the top of a roller coaster. So
that's amazing. Okay, so when did you finish up because obviously you own SA Judo Academy and you teach a lot of young as well as adult judo participants. Judo athletes, judo
fighters.
Yeah. So when did you finish up your professional career in judo?
Yeah, well, I actually started this place in 2007, so a year before the Olympics. So I did this at the same time as competing in judo, and it had its challenges, but it also gave me opportunities as well. My last judo competition was the 2014 Commonwealth Games, which were in Glasgow.
Great. Okay, so now you're obviously going to be fighting in the DFC on the 22nd. The 24th. What brought you to DFC or to MMA?
I think every martial artist fancies himself a little bit, and they all want to see, I guess, where they can test themselves and how do they stack up against other people. So there's that aspect of it. The other one is I've always been a competitive person. I like to test myself physically. Fighting just happens to be something that I'm okay at. Not much of a runner. So there's that aspect of it. That I guess that you start to miss the opportunity to test yourself physically. So when I retired from judo, I had a lot of injuries that come from 10, 12, 15 years of abusing your body at a high level. when I had a little bit of time off, some of those things recovered, but more importantly, I was now training in a different way. So those injuries are probably still there, but they don't get bothered anymore because I'm doing a different thing, even though it's similar. So you miss that opportunity to really push yourself, and very few people get that chance to see just how far they can push their body. Like most people don't get that opportunity to go, just how much can I lift, or just how much can I run. And I'm also very aware that, like, I'm not getting younger, I'm very aware of that. So you have a very limited window period to find out just how far you can test yourself. Then the last part of it is that adrenaline, that ability to compete in front of crowds. And what's something that DFC does is in judo, to compete in front of those crowds, you need to be on a world stage, which is very hard to maintain for long periods of time. There's a bunch of kids who are constantly snapping at your heels. DFC gives local athletes the opportunity to do that in Adelaide. And in front of home crowds, which is something which in judo, I never competed in front of big home crowds. Most of the big crowds I competed in were in overseas, where you're in hostile territory.
I totally agree with you. I mean, the Diamondback team do such a great job, and it's such I mean, it's great for the people that are there as well as the people competing. It's just amazing. I was blown away with it.
If you're any sort of, you don't have to be a martial arts fan to go enjoy Diamondback.
No, that's very, very true. So you're fighting Ryan Cooper in the next couple of weeks. So what have you been, can you tell me, what have you been working on specifically? I assume that you've watched heaps of videos and...
No, I haven't watched
You
heaps
haven't?
of videos.
Oh, okay.
No. I don't get too caught up in that. I'm not going to lie, I watched the first video of Ryan Cooper yesterday.
Yeah. Okay.
I've seen him fight at different shows, just as a spectator, and always shown an interest because he's a similar size to me and things like that. I already had a concept of what his style was, and the videos confirmed that. I'm very curious as to how the fight will actually play out. He seems to have a style where he enjoys grappling, wrestling, that sort of thing, which I do too, but sometimes what that can mean is that the fight ends up being played in a totally different field because both people go, oh, well, let's leave that. So I have no answers to how it's going to play out. What I've worked on is no secret. I don't hide it. I really back my grappling. So I've worked really hard on my fitness. It's probably the fittest I've been in a long time. My style is exhausting, so I need to be fit, and it's helped me that I've come off of a short backup from my last fight. So I only probably had 4 or 5 weeks off, and it's really made life easier to get back in. So I feel fit, I feel strong, and the other thing which I work on constantly is my striking with Kim Johnson, and I feel like that gets. It took me a long time to pick up the basics, but I feel like I'm now making ground quite quickly on that.
Well, we both saw the fight. Kim's an amazing coach and an athlete himself.
Yeah, he really broke down the way that I viewed striking, and it probably had to be broken down. And I think I've worked with him now for not a huge amount of time, probably only 6-8 months. But in that amount of time, I think I've made really big inroads. I'm no longer swinging and hoping. I've got much more of a concise plan of what I'm doing.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm actually really excited to see this fight in a few weeks. So, in sport, obviously, judo Olympian, gym owner, MMA competitor. What's your number one tip for success in sport?
I think you need to chase perfection. If you're content with anything less than perfection, you're not going to cut it. Because it's a relentless and ruthless environment. So whether you will achieve perfection, in reality, only a very small minority will. And even then, if you spoke to them, I'm sure most of those people would still say, no, did I ever get perfection? Probably not. But you cannot be content with anything other than perfection, and that has to be in everything from your diet and your training, and you have to be very, very hard on yourself, because nobody will be as hard on yourself as what you can be.
Yeah, you mentioned diet and training. So what kind of lifestyle, how do you live your life to maintain your health and your body? Because again, you'd be putting your body through an immense amount of workload. It
changes, and you get smarter all the time. So there's things I look back on now and I just shake my head and think, what were you thinking at the time? But that's part of learning. I think the best thing as well is to learn off people who have done it, because learning off your own mistakes is a slow way. Myself, I think balance is super important. It's something that I picked up more as I've gotten older, and that's really your mental well-being and your mental state is so important that you're in a good place. So that means something I probably didn't pay as much attention to previously, making sure that everything else in your life is good. If everything else is, and you don't neglect those things, because if all those things are good, when you come to training, you're good, you're mentally good. So, you know, worry about that, and having balance. So in the past, like when I was a teenager, I was ruthless at, like, you know, someone's birthday, someone really close to me's birthday or wedding, no, can't go, I'm going to training. Not even a big training, just training. But I've gotten much better balance of that now, because I think it's really important that you have to make, if you're a better you're going to be a better athlete.
That's great. So my last question, what mantra do you live by, Steve?
Yeah, it's probably more something the last couple of years. I think, like, we all go through little moments where we kind of almost get our, I guess, our own, like, mortality challenged, and you know, whether it be yourself or you see somebody else who's had that challenged. And I've had a real kind of view of, I guess, a screw it, let's do it approach. So if I ever think about doing something, I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to do that. Should I do it? Should I not do it? I just go, yeah, do it.
Do it.
So I had that. I jumped out of a plane the same way, and my first MMA fight, like, you know, I jumped out of a plane to have an MMA fight within a really short period of time, and both of them are probably reflective of that same. I thought about doing MMA for a long time. I thought about it. There's always excuses. My knee's sore. I've got a cold. Whatever it might be.
I've got things to
but
do.
you know, you've got things to do. But you know, you just kind of just bite down on it and just go, screw it. Let's do it. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks again for joining us, and I wish you the best of luck on the 24th of Feb. If anybody wants tickets to see Steve and all the other amazing MMA athletes, please jump on the Diamondback Fighting Championship website, and it will give you all the information there for DFC 8 on the 24th of February this year. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thanks.